Hello and welcome. I'm Phil Svitek, and in this very special episode, I'm going to get to interview Jeffrey Crane Graham and Candice Cruz about their movie Always Lola, which is available today on Amazon, iTunes, as well as Google. Now, Jeffrey Crane Graham is the writer, director, producer of the movie. Candice Cruz is one of the 6 main actors in the ensemble piece. And I'll let Jeff kind of explain what the movie's all about. That's one of the questions I ask him. But I just wanted to kind of, before the interview, just kind of give a few things about it. Number one, I've been lucky enough to have a front row seat to the making of this movie. I wasn't there on set necessarily, but, since inception to completion, I've borne witness to Jeff and the rest of the team put this thing together. So it's been a pleasurable journey. I don't take credit in any way. Merely I was always rooting for this movie, knew that it was something special. And, if you follow my work, I love championing other people's work. And hopefully that's evident as we go through the discussion. Now, I've also linked to down in the description other interviews that Jeff has done with people that I think really round out this conversation. I got them for an hour, and there's so much other stuff that I would have loved to talk to them about. You blink and it's sort of over. My main focus with this interview was to go deeper, right? At times you'll see me kind of push back and in a way challenge some of the answers, not because I'm trying to be negative or anything like that. I want to get to the real specificity of an answer. In fact, Jeff, when he did an interview with Roxy Stryer, who's one of the other stars in Always Lola, Jeff kind of joked about, like a lot of it came down to luck. And she was like, Jeff, we've been talking for like an hour and 15 minutes. Clearly it wasn't luck. There's all these series of decisions that happen. And so, I wanted to really take that and go very granular so I can provide and highlight, the steps that it does take to really make a feature film. And yes, it can be arduous and there's a lot of it that goes into it, but it's possible, right? And, I love that spirit from Jeff overall, that he just decided to go out and make it, because that's my spirit, right? Like, I love when artists don't just talk about doing something, but actually go do it. It's a fun experience because, Jeff in many ways had a front row seat to my 2 movies, right? More particularly the second one, a Bogota trip, because that was also when he was like pre-planning his and we would like share ideas. Now we don't talk about that as much, but because again, just due to time limitations. Most of the time we spent talking about pre-production stuff, production stuff. So we didn't go into post-production and stuff like that. But, that's a whole separate journey that, I've talked about on various episodes of mine and stuff like that. And, hopefully in the future, I get to bring Jeff back and we can dive into some of those stuff. But I think, in the hour that we do spend together, we really scratch at a lot of insightful stuff. So without further ado, here is my interview with Jeffrey Crane Graham as well as Candice Cruz.
I know this is like one of the most basic questions, but I think, for anyone kind of just jumping in blind, what's Always Lola?
Well, Phil, thanks for having me. Do you care if I take this one, Candice?
Yeah, please do.
Always Lola is a micro-budget narrative feature film. So for fans of movies, we made one. It's in some ways, it's a lot like any of the big movies you'd be seeing at a movie theater made by studios because it's a story-driven, character-driven movie with great performances. But we did it with far less money than most of those movies do. And what the movie is about is these 5 best friends who reunite on their annual camping trip. Candice plays one of those 5 friends. They reunite to mourn the loss of their best friend Lola, who died the year before and who normally organized this trip. But this year, her sister kind of shows up seemingly uninvited And little does this friend group know that her sister in particular is hiding a big secret around Lola's death that slowly leaks out during this trip. And that secret threatens to kind of destroy their friend group and their memory of Lola. It's funny, the pitch makes it sound very serious, but I would say at the end of the day, it's kind of a feel-good celebration of life, and you'll laugh a lot. So that's always Lola.
Yeah, and I absolutely loved it, and I think
Thanks, Phil.
I think you always say like it's also a comedy, because I think given the subject matter, people can think that it's so grim and dour. But to me, it's both. Like life is always those ups and downs, navigating those things. And so I really appreciate it. It's been out for just a little over a week. How do you guys feel? I mean, there's such a goodwill to the movie, and I feel like, I don't know, you guys kind of felt that magic, and now for others to experience it, like what's that even like?
Candice, you go.
Yeah, it's been very surreal, to be honest with you. I mean, we shot this movie back in 2021, and it was one of the best experiences of my life. And I don't say that just because Jeff is in the room with me, but I do say that wholeheartedly because it was such an incredible atmosphere and creative space. And the first time that I'd really been given and afforded the opportunity to let my acting legs stretch. Majority of my stuff had been, a few lines here and there and acting class and things like that. So this is the first time where I got to play an ensemble lead character role. And so to be able to have that experience and so fondly look back on it, it's almost like watching, I've heard people say this in interviews before, it's almost like watching a whole movie to some capacity, because you remember what you were doing each point of that movie and what that day was like and what it was like on set and what your prep was like. And so for people to be having that experience themselves in their own way, and so many people coming to me having such beautiful reactions to it and heartfelt feelings about everything and just beautiful words, it's very overwhelmingly just beautiful. I keep saying those words, but it's just like, it really is. And it's just, it makes everything so much more special, because to me and to all of us, we made magic. And so for people to be regurgitating that and saying that back to us, it's just the icing on top of the cake.
And how did you,
So well said.
I'm very curious, how did you fully become involved? Because obviously you guys knew each other from AfterBuzz TV, where we all worked in various capacities, you as a host. And, I'm not going to take any credit, but I think, Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, you did call me at one point of like, hey, because Candice and I worked on a short film together. And I think you asked me a little bit about that experience. And I was like, Candice, she's going to deliver for you. Am I incorrect? Am I like making up a story?
No, I'm sure I did. It's funny. I don't like totally remembered that, but I'm sure that I did. I had worked with Candice at like Phil mentioned, a podcast production company called AfterBuzz TV, where Candice was hosting. So I knew that Candice was very, very talented, and I knew that she had a lot of charisma on screen, but in a totally different capacity than acting. And I was running our red carpet program, and whenever Candice was available for carpets, I would always, well, I shouldn't say this on air, I would be democratic about who I was picking, but if Candice was the best choice and she was available, I would be like very excited that Candice was going, because I knew Candice was extremely professional and good at her job. But again, I didn't know if you were an actress. So when I asked Candice to audition, it's a good fit for you, the part. I mean, like, it is a Latinx girl, and that's an important part of the character, but I was also just like, I hope Candice is good. Like, I hope she's as good at acting as she is at hosting, because I would love to work with her for the experience of the movie. And then your audition knocked my socks off, which I was so relieved. I was like very excited and also relieved because I wanted you. So I was like, okay, she's good. Was kind of how it felt.
I want to cut in real quick, and then I want to go to you, Candice, because like when you and I made our short, like, you had that sort of leather jacket and you were like this badass woman. And not that it's the same role, but in a way, Camilla, right? In Always Lola has that badass edge to her. And yet that's so not your personality. And I remember us talking about it, that like you get in a way almost like typecast into this. So like, can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because it is completely antithesis of who I am as a person. I've literally taken up boxing in the last year and a half because I've realized and come to the conclusion that these are the types of roles I'm going out for. So I'm like, I at least have to tap into some type of anger or that energy in other ways. But yeah, it's very interesting, but I think it's such a blessing that I end up getting to do that because as an actor, I don't want to speak for all actors, but I think majority of us can say we choose this field because we want to escape from ourselves sometimes. We want to be able to stretch our legs and to play pretend and be someone that is completely opposite of who we are. That's when we get to be invigorated, and we also can play around and bring our colors from our own background into the character and see how that works. And so to be typecast in something that is literally the yin to my yang of what I am as a person, I think is just a really cool challenge as an actor, and something that I've been working on a lot. And so to be able to play Camilla was just such an exercise as well. And I think, I do cry a lot in this movie, just heads up. And, reading Camilla on paper, she doesn't give off that vibe whenever I first read her. She definitely has more of like that hard edge, badass type of like grit and anger to her. And there was a point where I was like, Jeff and I talked about like the layers and the colors of her. And I didn't want to limit her to only being one note either. And I think that someone that's angry is in some way repressing things. So being able to let that out in emotion and cry. And also, we even challenged, there's this scene where we're in the coffee shop of like, Jeff and I talked about it. Why don't we try it where you try so hard not to cry? And I think it gives so much more depth to who she is as a person rather than just being this angry best friend that is pissed off at the world, I think that being able to bring that part of myself, that empathy that I try so hard to have within my life into that anger was a really nice mixture.
And you know what? If I could just quickly jump in, you showed me that in your audition. And one of the most fun things about being a writer director is like when you bring actors into the process, they'll enliven your characters so much and add dimension to them just because inevitably putting a person into the body of a thing that you wrote on a page it's like magic. That's the most fun part of the whole process. And I was like, oh, this is so great seeing this character that I did write with a very hard edge that you do bring in the movie, but the whole movie to me, your performance is just like slowly stripping away that anger to reveal wounds. And that was totally what you showed me in those auditions. And I was like, oh, because the audition, I kind of intentionally gave like two very different scenes that you needed to show. And even in that process, you showed me so much more than I realized was there. So that was just so much fun.
Thank you. And something that like before Phil, that question, I loved that question. What I was going to say is like when I did audition and Jeff approached me about the audition, I was going through such a hard point in my life. That was like beginning of 2021. So we're coming out of the pandemic. We all had our own experiences of that. And so I was going through kind of an awakening that was very low. And like, I think I hit my lowest the day before I got the email from Jeff. And I remember going to my friend Melissa, and she brings this up all the time about the movie. I almost didn't submit a tape. I was very close because I was at that point where I was like, I don't know if I have it in me. I'm tired. Like, I just don't know. And she was like, you're here. It's set up. Let's just do it. And so we did it. And I'm so grateful that I did because it really reinvigorated and was the answer to what I was looking for before I got that email.
It probably informed your performance a little bit.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about I had a different question. I definitely want to talk about kind of people's backstories, but let's jump into, because I think it's a good segue to the experience of filming. Because in a lot of ways, I mean, this was shot very quickly, 2 weeks, give or take. And it's such an intense experience. And I definitely want to talk about that aspect of it. But I'm also, in a way, for artists' sake, I'm very curious what happens the day when you're done, right? Because you're on such a high that like you're with these people, you're making something special. And in a blink of an eye, it's almost over, right? And then we get moments like this when we kind of reunite and stuff like that. So I don't know. I just want to talk about the mental aspect of completing something. And I know it's more of a phase, because obviously, right now you're involved. Candice, for you, Jeff, you went into editing. So I know it's not like technically the movie over, but I'm always very curious, and I don't think that's talked about enough.
It's almost like, it's so funny because we did a summer camp movie of sorts, but it's kind of like, you remember back in school when you go to summer camp and you're like on such a high because you're with all your friends and you're getting to have all that fun. And then you have to go back to reality and you almost go through like a depressive moment. There's almost like that week or 2 weeks of withdrawal of like, now what? And I think trying to ride from that high, I'm very lucky that like we had such an incredible cast and Jeff did such a great job in casting all of us, because we did have such a camaraderie that we didn't really have a full downtime. It wasn't like that quick low that you normally come off of when you're done with a project, because we did stay in touch and we had friendships and we continued to carry on after the film. So I think that was really helpful. But I think it is a challenge. It is very much of like that question of like, especially in this industry, when is something else going to come along? Like this answered me being on set, proved to me that this is what I want to do with my life. And so when you can't have that immediate gratification right afterwards, it is a little bit of a mind twist where you're like, okay, how do I keep that creative juice going when the opportunity isn't necessarily knocking at the door right now?
That's so well said. I was thinking the exact same thing, Candice, where like the weird thing, and Phil's a director too, so you can relate to this, Phil, but the weird thing about directing is that we don't get to do it very much. It's like if someone brought up this point that like even let's say a director's done 8 movies and each of those shoots was 2 months. That's only 16 months of an entire life, which is, just over a year of time. Whereas like the crew, like your second gaffer has probably been on set for a total of 10 years. So it's a weird thing for directors, because even though it's a passion, even the most experienced directors haven't been on set that much, not nearly as much as their crew or even maybe their cast. So I think I had the feeling of just like, I need to treasure this experience. And on the last day, kind of feeling a little heartbroken that I know I'm going to be on set directing again, hopefully soon, but at that time, I was like, it might be years until I'm back in this position, which can be a little bit of a weird feeling.
Yeah. And it's just the nature of it, right? Like it speaks nothing about your talent or anything. I mean, it's just every director usually, there's years in between. So you're right. And I know I'm going from a heavy subject. For those listening, I tend to go all over the place. I apologize. But I want to go back to the backstory aspect of it, right? Because I think it's very integral to you as an actor, Jeff, you as both the writer, director. Each character is so well fleshed out, right? And we only get 90 minutes, and obviously that screen time is divided, but within those little moments we have to know these like 19 years worth of history of these characters, right? So yeah, where do you sort of even begin to contemplate that and have that depth, where it is so authentic as opposed to generic?
That's so nice. I'm also like super excited to hear Candice's answer on this one, but I think I will say the movie's so personal for me, and the way I like to articulate like how the characters showed up was the movie is, I wouldn't say it's autobiographical at all, but I would say it's emotionally autobiographical, and that like the feelings and experiences that the characters go through very closely reflect some of my own. When I lost my friend Peggy, who lost her life in her 20s. And there's elements of mental health that are like a very important runner through the movie that really connect to Peggy's experience as well. But there are basically 5 different characters in the movie that are walking through this process of grieving their friend. And I would say like at different times in my life, I showed up as a version of those characters. And someone asked me in an interview, like, how do you create characters? And I think the advice I would give is like, lean into Phil does this too in his movie, A Bogota Trip, which is great. And when that comes out, I would highly recommend it. But it's like you're leaning into your own experiences and emotional understanding of the world, especially when you're going through an experience, and maximizing those feelings and channeling them into a character. So the anger I felt about both the experience and my friend most showed up in Candice's character. And then the guilt over the anger that you feel is exactly the conversation that you and Catherine have in the coffee shop near the end of the movie. So I think like leaning into anything that feels true, and especially if it feels like scary or embarrassing or vulnerable to admit, like even better. That's when you need to write it. So I don't know if that's helpful. I think also too, the actors are just so good that they created a sense of lived-in friendship, which I'll definitely take credit for. But I think a lot of that has to do with.
Well, I think it's an entry point, but it's not the specifics, right? Because
that's true.
like, okay, Camilla needs to be angry. Okay, cool. But in the wrong hands, right? Both the writer, the director, and an actor, like that could just be disastrous. And one note, as you kind of mentioned, it could have gone, right? But it wasn't that. So I don't know, Candice, I'm curious so Jeff's provided the entry point. Now, how do you finesse that thread to have those specifics?
I think there's a lot of layers to that. So I think number one, I think open communication with your director and your writer and producer, which Jeff and I did very early on before we got there, of like, number one, for an actor, you have your perception of the character, but it can be very different than what the writer had. And somehow you have to kind of meld the two together to make it work. And it is a big puzzle piece, and especially in an ensemble film where you have so many other moving parts that they all have to kind of make sense, right? And I think that's where the magic comes on screen, is like, I had my opinion of what Camilla was. I need to see what Jeff's opinion of Camilla was and see where those points could not be changed to serve the script and to serve the story, and where some points could be changed that would make sense for a living, breathing character, right? You have to kind of find that middle ground, and it is a lot of communication. And like, I came prepared to our meeting and being like, this is the type of background, like you said this particular line, and I think that this actually means this because, she had this history with her parents or with her mom, or, is she first generation? Is she second generation? Does she come from wealth? Does she come from poverty? Like, there's a lot of things that influence who we are as people that are extraneous things outside of who we are on paper or like what we're saying. So having a little bit of that, even down to the nuances of like, for some reason, I don't like candy. I know that this is a weird point, but like, I like chocolate. I don't like candy, but for some reason in my brain, Camilla loved Twizzlers. She smoked. And so to me, immediately, I literally said, Jeff, she eats Twizzlers, and specifically this particular one. And they had them on set, and I was eating them the entire time. And I think for an actor to play with different entry points in that way is also really cool. So backstory, nuance, costuming makes a huge difference. But then also, one of our first nights when we were all sitting together as a cast, some people have a very different process. Some people do not do backstories, and they only focus on specifically the story of what they're doing. But I did say if anyone wanted to share their backstory, it would be really nice. And then also Roxy and I hopped on the phone because we're specifically best friends in this film. So we both felt like it was a good idea to have a conversation, and we knew each other before this project, but not to the capacity of being best friends. And she is to this day one of my dearest best friends post movie. So I think even having that entry point for us to like talk about her background, what my background is, like how did we meet, like what that was like, I think brought so much more to this short period of time that you guys are seeing on screen. And so I think it was a combination of all those things. And then also knowing all of that and throwing it out the window when you're actually playing opposite a person, because ultimately you really do have to listen and really take exactly what they're giving to you. Because as people, we're not our backstories. Sometimes how I operate with one person is not how I'm going to operate with another person. And being able to have all this information and then completely ignore it and be focused and believe that you're embodying that person, I think is where the real work comes into play.
Yeah. So I'm curious.
One more thing I would quickly say, if I can jump in fast, Phil, that's such a thoughtful answer, Candice, like such a masterclass for me. I love learning from actors. I think in terms of writing too, one thing I really tried to do in the writing was the ultimate challenge a writer faces always is balancing exposition with a lived-in sense of natural reality, right? Because the job of a screenplay is to relay information. That's what storytelling is. But counterintuitively, it's also the job to disguise the fact that you're doing that. It's like a very, it's hard. And so I think like I tried to create a language among this friend group that let us relay information in a way that was lived in and natural and felt organic to how these people would actually talk. So like when you and Lee are interacting, there are hints about your past relationship, but you never say like, oh, like now that we've been dating and hooking up on the side, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
It's like we hear about this party you guys hooked up at, or like, you know, sometimes you can communicate just as much through silence as you can with words. And like, even the idea of the movie's built around a scavenger hunt, like I feel like that moment when you pull out that book that you and Lola had shared, like we learn a lot about you two without having to say it all. So that's, I think, another thing I would advise for writers is think about ways you can relay information and exposition without actually telling the audience what it is, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think you'll appreciate this, Jeff, and maybe you've heard it before. It's almost in a way like the audience doesn't need to know what's happening as long as they trust the actor. So the best examples given is like make up a completely, a board game, card game, doesn't matter, where nobody else in the audience knows the rules. But as long as the people that are playing it and seem confident, then it's all of a sudden engaging because there's stakes of like, wait, who's going to win? I have no idea like what's going on. Anyways, that's
great. That's really good, Phil, because it's the idea that you're living with them as the audience and you don't even need to know. Because you're in the room with them and they know, so therefore you do too. Kind of, that's really good.
Exactly. But I want to jump back a little bit to pre-production, right? Because I think movies in general, right, really live on the pre-production and the work that goes into it. And in a lot of ways, like I listen to the Team Deacons podcast, and a lot of people that are guests on that talk about how Hollywood has been shortening the windows of pre-production. And to a large detriment. And so I want to get from your perspective, like how long did you spend with pre-production? It seems like it was quite beneficial because you got that time. So that way, when you had the 2 weeks of actually filming, you guys could just run. Is that correct to say?
Yeah. I mean, when did you come on, Candice? Like when did I greenlight you?
Check
like
the
April,
emails.
maybe, or May?
Right. So I auditioned in April. It was literally the weekend of Easter. And then I had a callback. I had my callback 2 weeks later. And then I had my chemistry read a week and a half after. So May.
Yeah.
Around like mid-May.
It's interesting, Phil, because unlike you, I don't love rehearsal. I kind of like giving the actors space to just show up and like they haven't emotionally worked the material out. And again, there's like absolutely no right or wrong way. There are directors I adore who love rehearsal. But we had a lot of conversations before set, which Candice was alluding to. So like, I loved talking with the actors and like talking about the script. My policy was basically like, I sent the shooting script out, a couple versions of it, but like months before the shoot, just to like give it to you all to read it and get comfy with it. And I was like, you can offer me any rewrite suggestions you want. I may or may not take them, which is obviously my prerogative, but like I definitely want to hear. And 95% of the time, no one suggested anything big because I think the script was in fairly good shape before set. But at the same time, I think 95% of what anyone brought to me, I took because actors have such a specifically sharp point of view that you might just not have as the writer director because it's your job to see the story differently than it is for the actors. So, I mean, we just talked a lot before set.
Yeah, I think too, in that regards of process, like with script and whatnot, I think I like to personally read it and then set it away and let it like breathe, and then I'll read it and then set it away and then figure out all the other like little nuances. I loved the way that we approached it with like conversation because then it is what you're saying, it's lived in when you're there rather than like, there's a specific scene that I actively chose not to read something ahead of time because I wanted to make sure that it was extremely visceral and alive for everyone. And I think that that's also the excitement of like the creativity that like you don't do too much in pre.
And you're so good in that scene. I do just want to say like Candice is so amazing in the movie, but there's one, it's kind of a big scene in the movie. Like you could like the big scene. Every character has a very meaningful moment, but you're sort of the engine of that scene. And there's two moments, that one where you're reading something and then you button the scene up with like a brutal line.
Line.
When I was writing it, it was hard for me to write and like kind of emotional. And then you even brought it. There's something so specifically broken about the way you do that moment that I just am like, this is an Oscar. I just like love you in that scene. It's so good.
It was such a fun day. I think there's such an interesting thing about being an actor when you do get to cry and stretch that muscle, because we were shooting that scene for about 5 hours.
Yeah.
And so to cry for 5 hours is like dehydration.
Yeah. You crushed it though.
But it was great. It was so much fun. It was a lot of fun.
It's a very powerful scene, and forgive me because I know in many ways, like obviously there's such magic to it all, but I like going back to the banal questions only because I think without that, none of that happens. So like, yes, you guys are talking about the character, but on a movie like this, and I know firsthand, there's such an intimacy, right? Because it's not just, okay, character talk. I want to talk about props, costumes, because all of that goes into the conversation. Mm-hmm. And you're not, it's not like you're talking to the costumer, Jeff, that then is going to do a fitting with Candice and so forth. Like, no, it's essentially you guys, right? And literally like the amount of homework just to like figure out these things is, the ownership is essentially on you, as opposed to having it be spread out, as it otherwise might be on a Hollywood movie. So talk to me about that side of it.
Yeah. I mean, essentially the actors, gratefully, it was in their contract. I was like, hey, we'll provide you some clothes, but like some of it's going to be yours. Basically, the nature of the movie is like 50% of them, maybe 70% of the movie is happening within like a 3-day timeline. And then 30% of the scenes are either happening in flashback or on a separate timeline. So basically, we decided from a logistics standpoint that the 70% of the movie that is happening over the course of like 2 days was going to be very limited costuming, but very reworn. I'm not explaining this very well, but I think what I'm trying to say. I
get what you're saying, but like, well, here's the interesting part. In a way, it's like both a positive and negative, right? Because I know firsthand, like that's great, and you feel like that's a small window, but it's actually still a lot of costumes, right?
Right.
Number one. Number two, so okay, maybe they might have a lot of costume changes, but they're shooting for X number of days, and how the hell do you wash that, right? Because you know what I mean. Like these are the things that on an indie level, it's just you're kind of like, okay, again, that's a positive, but all of a sudden now we're facing negatives.
Yeah, because of the nature of like that 70% costume that was most of the movie, we got duplicates of those clothes. So basically the production was smart. Like, we'll provide your wardrobe for the stuff you're wearing a lot, and then you'll provide your wardrobe for like the one-off scene moments. So basically Laura and I just went to like Old Navy, Walmart, and Target and got a bunch of clothes. And I think, am I right, Candice, that we had you all pick on when you got to set, basically?
Yeah, so I mean, I brought a lot of stuff. I had a huge pieces of luggage, but I think also too having extras and other stuff from our own wardrobes help too, because I think that wardrobing does inform the character a lot. It informs how you embody that person, how you walk, how you like just become that. It finally feels real. And so the first day that we got on set, we met with Laura and Jeff and tried on our own pieces, and then figured out what was going to be per scene. And I still wear those items that they gave me from set all the time.
I'm so glad.
And I love them. I love them.
Awesome.
But they really do. It's really interesting how important that is, Phil. Like what you're saying is like that really does inform a lot of the character. And I think majority of the movie is actually the wardrobe that you guys picked out for me. I think there's only one scene really that was my own, which is the flashback with Lola.
And then the coffee shop too.
And then the coffee shop, yeah.
But yeah, I think it was like we knew that it was logistically, if we want to get like banal, it's safer to have just one version of a look in those one-off scenes because you're less likely to like spill on it. Like the longer you're wearing something, the more likely you are to ruin it. Yeah. And with continuity, we're shooting out of order. So like if you were to spill coffee on something on the last day, but that takes place in the middle of the movie, the puzzle becomes like so terrifying because you're like, do we reshoot all that other stuff? Do we explain it away in the movie? Whereas like worst case scenario, if you spill in a one scene outfit, you could just do it again. So it's such a puzzle, and it's the part of production that I enjoy more than I thought I would, but it's not the most fun because that's kind of But you know what? I ended up kind of liking the Jenga tower of like building the movie more than I thought I would.
Yeah.
Let me ask you one more about that. Like, how do you because we both went to other places to make movies, right? And so you're bringing the
Phil went to
cast and crew.
Colombia, which is insane, but keep going, Phil.
Yeah.
But you have to pack, right? And so for my team, I was like, listen, guys, pack like your character. You get a carry-on, and that's it. Like the check bags, that's reserved for equipment. So I don't know what your rule set. It seems like you were a little bit more lenient with that, from what it sounds like. But I'm just curious, because you guys went to Ohio. So yeah, what was like your travel itinerary, as it were?
We paid for obviously your travel, but I think Candice, you booked yourself, and we refunded you, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I'm from that area, so I got to go and like visit with family outside of that.
Yeah. I think for me, and it's an area where we're slightly different as directors, Phil, like I feel like I love set, and that's when I feel like I have a lot of like authorial insight. But in terms of like process and like what you bring, what you wear, what you do, I'm kind of like, whatever helps you. I'm happy to like collaborate with you on that if you want my opinion. But like, it's funny with Camilla's backstory, I love that you built that, but I didn't necessarily feel like I needed to know that because in my mind, all it did was just inform the way you showed up. And you would ask me questions, which I loved. But like, it was almost fun for me to be like, you have a secret that I don't even need to know.
Yeah.
I feel like it created a really cool dynamic and created a little bit of a sense of like mystery in a way, which made it really fun to work with you and see what would show up. It just felt a little more electric in that way. I feel. Yeah.
No, that's awesome. Yeah. I mean, I think there is a distinction. Like, I think there's a difference between, saying like, hey, we're going to go to Ohio to film a movie, and not in a bad way, versus like, I think my people's response is like, wait, we're going to Colombia. And so like, I had to put together a whole like documentation of like, here's how the outlets are. They're the same. Don't worry. They're only 2 hours ahead. Like all this stuff to like, just create a sense of calmness. Like, it's going to be okay. You're in good hands. Just make sure you have your passport. We'll be okay.
Exactly.
So let's see. I want to talk. So filming wise, obviously it looks beautiful. And you guys shot single cam, which is generally typical. I tend to go the opposite, not like multicam as in a sitcom, but I usually try to shoot for my stuff with 2 cameras just to speed it up. So I'm curious about just that decision for you, and how, and then by extension, the follow-up would be for you, Candice. What was that like? Because as you said, with that major scene, that's a lot of takes to have to go through,
Yeah. It's more coverage for the actors. You can speak to that, Candice, but the reason AJ, so my cinematographer, mutual friend of Phil's and me, named AJ Young, he's brilliant. We talked a lot about how we wanted to put the production together, and we had discussed 2 cameras at one point. We shot on the Panasonic S1H, which is a great camera, and particularly it's a great low light camera, which is good because we had a good number of exterior night scenes and like scenes lit by firelight and campfires, and that was important. But there's an interesting thing where I totally agree with you, Phil, that multiple cameras speeds up the production, but only if you have a certain number of conditions that you can match, which is like if you're shooting somewhat guerrilla and if you're not going to like spend a ton of, I think the nature of our movie was living in close up a lot. So we had to light it in a very specific way that might have made 2 cameras more challenging. And it's also like having another monitor, then having a second camera op. So in some ways, having a second camera can create more complications. And again, specifically with those flashback scenes, the grammar of those scenes was like shot in very tight close up. And sometimes when you have 2 cameras close up, it can kind of mess with your eye line in the edit. So those were the main reasons we decided to shoot on one. There were definitely times on set when I thought like a second camera would be nice here. But ultimately, I'm glad we did it the way we did.
Yeah, and by the way, just for point of clarification for everybody, I'm not saying one is better than the other. Like my big philosophy in general is whatever way the movie gets done, that's the correct way. Obviously, as long as you're not hurting and harming people, then so be it.
Totally.
But yeah, curious to, your perspective on cameras and the number of cameras and just filming in general. You can open it up there.
Yeah. I think for me, I haven't done multicam other than like the couple times that Phil, you and I worked together. We've done a couple things where there was a few cameras. I really enjoyed having the intimacy of just one with this particular setup. And I think it is for anyone that's more of a newer actor. I would say like I've been acting a lot in many years, but I think that this was the first feature film that was definitely like a masterclass in and of itself for me of, having one camera and really knowing how your body language works on camera, knowing where your shot is. I think that that's when it comes into play. Like for any actor to really test that and do that as much as possible. I encourage anyone to do background if they're brand new to being an actor, just so that you can understand your placements and how things work, and you can watch that, or doing any type of short film and whatnot, because it's just as much helpful for you, because then it doesn't become too much choreographed, but it still is choreographed, but you don't want it to get in the way of your performance and living in it. Does that make sense? Like, I know that that's kind of like back and forth, but knowing and also being aware of continuity and allowing that and making sure that you're aware of yourself in that puzzle piece as an actor of like, if I make the choice to reach out for something, if that's the choice I'm going to stick with, making sure that you continuously do that. And so there is a little bit of choreography and just being aware that like you have to be lived in and you're also being watched. And making sure of knowing where your lighting is and knowing where the camera is. And there's a lot of other nuances that I was so grateful playing opposite all my fellow actors. Some of them had done this a lot before. And so being able to watch them do it was very helpful, because I think for the longevity of the shoot and how many different shots, a lot of people don't realize how much goes into shooting just one scene. I've sat with my parents multiple times being like, there's this coverage and then there's coverage of someone else. And then there's the wide of two people. And then, there's so many different things, and making sure that you're aware of your own body and your body language and what you're doing is really important as an actor.
Yeah. Now I'm curious. So, as far as the process, right? Like, on Titanic, James Cameron,
which is basically our movie in terms of
I know, I was thinking the same thing, like, of course, yes, Titanic. Yeah.
Well, James Cameron, he talks about how, I forget which, but like either Kate or Leo was good on the first takes, and then, the opposite was better on the other takes. And so that dictated who got coverage first. So I'm curious, like, Jeff, did you sort of pick up on any of that and kind of change the way you filmed?
I think I would usually ask, right? And I think most of the time it worked out where like, there's a lot of partner scenes in the movie. The movie's basically either like ensemble scenes or partner scenes. There's like very rarely a scene with like three people. Right. So I think typically with these partner scenes, I think 90% of the time I would just be like, I'm going to go ahead and ask you all. And then if it's the same, we'll just figure it out. But most of the time it worked out that like some actors preferred the first take and like the other preferred. I'm trying to remember with you and Corinne in the coffee shop, who did we cover first? You?
We did me first.
Yeah.
And I think we did me first multiple times, especially when it was an emotional, heavy lifting in certain ways. When people watch, you'll understand a little bit more of what we're talking about if you haven't already. But there is some points where it's like, you don't want to over exhaust yourself either. So if we want to get a specific, I mean, maybe this is just selfish on my end, but I think that this is what we were talking about. It's like, if there's going to be a lot of emotional lifting on one actor rather than the other, really getting that coverage first. So that way you don't overly exhaust yourself. And then two, you can still be able to give back to your partner, but then it's not as much. If you're heavy lifting from the beginning, and let's say we were doing Corinne's coverage and I'm the one that's over here crying, we're losing out on that like emotional rawness, because then it's so done over and over and over that you're going to miss out on that take. So I think it was flipping between whichever character is going to be doing more typically went first.
Well, you know what? With that scene, especially, like, your characters are so opposite, and like Camilla wears her emotions on her sleeve, whereas Catherine represses her emotions and buries them. So like in that way, it kind of gave you the chance to wear your emotions on the sleeve right away. And it gave Catherine or Corinne like the chance to practice what it's like to bury those emotions under the intense pressure of that scene.
Right.
So that was why. That was my educated directorial answer as to why we did it that way.
Yeah. And too, it depends on the other person as well. So, I mean, it is a partner scene. So it is one of those things that like also the actors having to collaborate, being like, hey, do you mind if I go first? Or do you want to go first?
And sometimes it's lighting too. Like there's a beautifully lit outdoor scene with Catherine and Lola at the very beginning of the movie. And we just needed to shoot it the way we needed to because of the sun. So that's also a big thing.
Yeah. I'm curious, one of the reasons why I like, for me, using 2 cameras is because I can, obviously that fast coverage, but in a way, I've always been trying to figure out how to say it, and then B, solve for it. So, as open as we can get about it. So like there's times it happens in 2 ways. Number one, where like I'll film something and let's say an actor like does 90% of the take phenomenally, but they flub this one thing and they want to redo it. But in my mind, I'm like, I'm never going to use that bit. We're good to go, So that's sort of number one. Or number two, it's like, if I didn't get it, I just want to get that one tiny thing. But I feel like oftentimes to just put, especially if it's a pivotal scene, to put an actor and essentially just say a line or two, that can be very difficult without having the rest of the context of the scene for them to like get into it. So I don't know. Again, I know it's not necessarily technically a question, but I'd love to hear your thoughts, just in general about that aspect of it.
I mean, I think it's a person by person experience. It depends on the person, like it depends on the actor. I don't think there's ever a tried or true, but I know for myself, like, even if it's just that one bit that you may not want to, I think it almost comes from that fulfillment of like, okay, I gave it my all. I did everything. And I think that Jeff, you did a great job on that. Where even if we got it in the first take, and I think there were a couple of things where you're like, we got it in the first take, but there was one specific day that I just felt completely off. And I was like, I'm a horrible actor. I don't know what I'm doing with my life. I can't do this. And Jeff was like, we used the first take, but you felt like you needed to do it more. And so he gave me the grace as an actor to like, let me explore and at least feel like, okay, I did it. And I think it comes more from that element of it rather than necessarily like, listen, there is some point that like, as an actor, you go in, you say the line, you know exactly how to do it. Sometimes you're not going to be emotional. Sometimes you are not going to have an emotional reaction to it. And you're going to know exactly how to turn on and turn off. And then there's certain times, and that comes down to professionalism and practice and things like that. But then there are some times where you want to feel something. And I think that that's the part where like being able to have the opportunity to redo it may not be for the benefit of the director or the editor. It may just be for the actor to feel like, okay, I gave it my all. You may scratch all of it. I won't know the difference at the end of the day because I won't know what take you took, but I did it.
No, I think that's exactly right. And I've heard other like big A-list directors say the same thing about big A-list actors. So it's a great point. And it's funny what you just said, Candice, because I totally agree where you're like, sometimes you just come in and you just have to say the line. I always say that like 90% of filmmaking is trying to be as truthful and honest as you can and reflect the intimacy of the human experience as closely as you can. But 10% is like, now do it on your knees, squatting on an apple box because we're making an artificial thing in an artificial medium. So 10% of the time you have to do it differently than what feels natural because the movie demands it. So it's a weird thing where like, it's like on this take, you just have to do it slower. Even in real life, if this feels slow, it's reading differently in the movie and actually feels more honest at this speed. So it's a weird thing where like 90% of the time, the goal is to lock into what feels as close to true humanity as possible. And 10% of the time, it's bending those rules to serve the film.
Yeah. And a little bit more mechanical of like.
Mechanical. Yeah. I never give line readings unless it's like a pickup. And sometimes I'm like, you did it perfect. I want this version and we're low on time. Do you mind if I just kind of give you how I want the intonation to be? And you'll do it your way, but here's how I want it. And then you guys were cool with that.
And that's so nice too, because sometimes you're at a point where you're like, I've given it 3 different ways. I'm not giving you what you need. Like, please just tell me what you need so I can give it to you at that point. Yeah.
It's like a sense of trust where I'm like, I totally trust your instincts and you did it perfect, but this is just a me thing. So here you go, kind of thing.
And that's when I think it gets into collaboration too.
Yeah.
I'm curious, when you talk about like the tone and stuff like that, one of the big things for me with a Bogota trip, I wanted everyone to be like, listen, this is not how you guys would talk. And I literally filmed them at dinner and I was like, you guys are talking over each other. This is what I want in the movie. Not to be like, not every line that you read, yes, for an audience, it's supposed to be dramatic, but you as the person, the character is not supposed to give it this gravitas. So I'm just curious, like tonally, how, because mine's not exactly an ensemble piece, yours is more, but I'm curious, like how you approach that just dynamic of like, tone of, were you looking for that back and forth? Were you looking for more of those heavier moments, or I don't know.
I'm thinking, Candice, of like that final montage at the end that we do without dialogue. Like, I think this is kind of what Phil's talking about, right?
Yeah.
Do you want to get in?
Yeah, I think part of it is like logistics, right? We're using one camera. So there's only so many people sitting in the queue. And so it really is like your other actors playing across from you that you can't see in that shot. So it's just like the playful banter that goes back and forth. But, I think there has to be a comfortability with the actors. And I think that we were very lucky that we had that early on. I just always go back to that first night where we're all sitting in that house that we were staying at and just bantering back and forth and having that camaraderie so quickly on, I think informed and gave that what you're looking for, Phil, specifically, is that we became friends on and off screen. And I know that you're not always going to have that. So there's going to be sometimes that you're not going to have that on sets, and it was just like lightning in a bottle. But I think that having that trust in that relationship with everybody allowed us to have a little bit more of that back and forth banter, and also preparedness of like knowing your lines and knowing when you're coming in and just like jumping in when needed.
Yeah.
And I think to just follow up on what Candice is saying, like there's a couple scenes in the movie that are some of my favorites. And one of them is like, there's this final montage where the characters are remembering something. I want to keep it kind of vague, but we did it really with like very low dialogue that's meant to be inaudible. But like, I didn't write anything for you all. Like I gave suggestions and but I was like, I want you all to just talk to each other and like, let's experience like a lived in moment of humanity together. Yeah. And I love the way it feels because like what Candice is talking about really emanates from the screen. There's also a great like workout montage between Andrew's character and Colin's character. And that was primarily improvised. I wrote some stuff and I think we did it, but I was like, I really want to see what shows up if I just let the spirit move, and that's a fun way to direct sometimes because you get very human moments like what Phil is talking about.
Yeah, they were incredible in that scene. That's one of my favorite scenes of the entire movie.
I love it too.
Is that workout scene.
It's such a fun, I think it's a meaningful scene. Like it says a lot about their relationship and their friendship.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Because I think as far as that, it's like two people you wouldn't expect to be friends type of thing. I think is what it really comes down to.
Yeah.
Right. So I know we've got a few more minutes left. I want to talk about, so a lot of it does take place during the day, but a lot of it takes place during the night. So how did you approach it logistically? And then from an actor's perspective, what was the switch like, from one to the other?
Yeah, I'll go with logistics stuff because Candice's will be more interesting. But a lot of this was working with my, again, brilliant DP, AJ Young, who like also lit the movie and like helped. I mean, he is just a genius, but it was kind of a simple approach to our night stuff. And he had done exterior nights on other features, and his like workaround is we have this like giant mambo combo, which is like basically like a heavily reinforced C stand where you can run things up like 40 feet in the air and they're safe and reinforced. And we had just basically like a 50,000 kilowatt Joker light on that giant pole to cast like moonlight essentially over the set for our outdoor stuff, which created like a nice glow on the foliage behind you all to look like a moonlit edge, or like, I always joke like Candice is like a Pantene Pro V commercial. Like you just have such great hair. And those night scenes, I guess your hair was up for some of those, but even still, it's like your hair's backlit by that lighting. And that's all AJ. He just makes things look pretty. And then we basically use just like soft light mats, I think, to create just like a glow. and Firelight.
Did you do the day stuff first and then switch into night, or start with night, switch into day, or did you mix and match?
We had like a they call that a rolling schedule, where it's like you start early and end early, and as your week goes on, you're pushing things later and later, like a staircase. So it's like your first call time's 8 a.m., then by the end of the week, your call time's 5 p.m. So you're like 8 to 8, and then on the 6th day of the week, you're like 5 p.m. to 5 a.m., if that makes sense.
Yeah. And yeah, what was that to experience that schedule?
You guys did a great job. I will say, first of all, I didn't know that it was called a rolling schedule, so I learned something new today.
I might have made that up. There's a term. I'm going to Google it while you answer.
Okay, you Google, let me know, because I think I mean, it's exactly that. And again, I think they did such a great job of organizing it in a way that, like, I wasn't going to do an 8 a.m. and then the next day have like a 6 p.m. to a 6 a.m. And the switch over, you know, I think all of us did our due diligence of looking at the schedule for ourselves and kind of making sure that, like, we went to bed on time, or when we switched, or we would stay up if we needed to stay up to get onto a new sleep schedule. And also the fact that it was ensemble was helpful, because a lot of times you'd be doing it with someone else. So it wasn't like, you know, I think there was only 1 or 2 days I roomed with Corinne, that we were on opposite schedules. And so we just communicated, you know, sleeping like, hey, be quiet. I have an early shift. You have a later shift, that type of thing. But it is a little bit, you know, you just have to get used to it. You have to try and keep normalcy as much as you can, like going to the gym, if that's something that you do, or getting a coffee at the time. Like the last day we did a night shoot, the last day of the entire shoot. And so we were done at 6 a.m., but all of us still stayed, like we went home and went to bed, and then we woke up at like 3 p.m. So we all went to go get breakfast together, and you kind of try and like just get back to a normal schedule. But I think that that's all in fun of it. I think that that's part of the excitement of being on a set, is that it does kind of feel like summer camp. You kind of are just like all over the place and picking your schedule accordingly and doing all of that. So it wasn't super disruptive by any means. I think that you just like, you prepare at the beginning and you do the best you can with it. And then when you can, if you need to take a nap, you take a nap on set. Cause there is a lot of hurry up and wait when it comes to making movies that we did have a lot of downtime where we would have to be waiting. And so you just take a nap if you need to, or drink an extra cup of coffee.
I think what I'm hearing is, I think I made a mistake. No disrespect to Ohio, in Columbia, to like keep anyone like on their schedule and like in the Airbnb. There was just too much calling out there, and so like everyone was out and about trying to just soak in Columbia as much as possible.
I think that makes sense. But we did have a couple, in all fairness, Jeff and Laura did a great job to let us all have like a day or 2 days off within the 14 days that we were there. So we did get to explore the lovely city and go around, and we had a great time. Like, shout out to Coffina. I know that Roxy said that in her other interview the other day, but that was one of our favorite spots. And there was one day that all of us were off, and the 3 girls, we went and actually painted pottery together out on the lawn. So like we found different things to do, and we had a great time. I still have that coffee mug and I love it.
I couldn't find the term.
Oh, it's all good.
I tried.
You know what's hilarious? My team also did a pottery day, although
did you?
it was also part of the movie, right? So like,
oh yeah.
That's like the funny part is I tried to like incorporate those tourist moments as part of the actual movie and the experience of it.
There you go.
But still, there was so much else there.
Multitasking.
Now, obviously, there's so many other places we could talk about, you know, and things of that nature. But as we wrap out, any sort of final thoughts that you just want to share with the world?
I'm just so insanely proud of this film, and I'm just so grateful every single day that I got to be a part of it. You know, people are asking me about it, and I think too, for anyone that, you know, once you watch, it has so many emotional moments, and something that I think that we can all find ourselves in different pieces of different characters. Just like Jeff was saying, he found himself in each of the characters. I think, you know, I watch it and I find, you know, parts of myself in Catherine, and parts of myself in Trey, and parts of myself in Lola. You know, each of the characters I can find different pieces to relate to. And I think that's the beauty of the script and the way that the movie was edited together. And just, you know, like I said at the very beginning of the interview, you know, you make a movie hoping that people will enjoy it, but when people really do actually enjoy it and give you that meaningful moment and that message to you, it makes it feel like it's all worth it. You know, all the stuff in between, like what we were talking about, the in between of when the next job is, or when the next interview is, or when anything is, to have that piece, I will always be so proud of. And to even have life experience that I've had post making the movie that always relate back to it, has been such a nice pillar of comfort and love for me to go back to. So Jeff, thank you for trusting me with Camilla.
Oh my
and
gosh.
I hope that everyone loves the movie just as much as we do.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, yeah, it's fun because Candice and I have never done like a one-on-one interview like this, so this is a fun chance for me to just like shout her out. It's funny, Candice, I felt like on set, process-wise, we were the most similar. Like I think like we're both emotion, like our way into a story is like emotion first.
Yes.
So it was really fun to work with you because I was like, if I were to ever be an actor, I feel like I would be Candice. Like that was kind of how I felt. So I felt like we just had like, I really connected with all the actors on set, which is lucky because I've heard some directors be like, I just can't connect with this actor. And like, I really was lucky that like I had a nice feeling of safety and like story intimacy with everyone on set. But I do feel like there was often times when like, I just feel like we work similarly. So it was really fun working with you.
And I want to jump into that too, though, because I want to commend you as well, because I think that it is something that a lot of directors, it is a skill to be able to work with actors and multiple different personalities and actors, and to be malleable in that way, to be a leader. And for us to feel safe by your leadership and to be able to be guided because you know the big overarching picture that we can't see, because we're so insular in one character role. But to also be able to know our way in. It's the fact that you literally just said like we work so similarly because my way in is emotion. That's because you listened and you paid attention and you were able to see like, okay, how can I get Candice into that? Because in there are days that I can't show up, and how can you get me into that place? I think was just so beautiful, and it felt very safe to be able to do that.
Well, I hope it's not the last time. I'm like, I'll work with Candice on anything. So if anyone's watching, and Phil can speak to it too, because you've worked with Candice, if you're like wondering if like casting Candice is worth like having her on set, it's the best choice you'll ever make. And Phil, I want to just quickly thank you too, because for those watching, Phil was one of, first of all, were at table reads like early on. And you also watched cuts and helped walk me through those. And Phil had far more editing experience than I did going into it. So there's a reason you're in the special thanks of the movie, Phil. You're a very important part of the DNA of it happening. So
all good. Thanks. Do any of the actors hate me for like cutting down some of their stuff?
Oh, no, I don't think so. Honestly, I feel like everyone's
I joke about it because like I feel like most of my notes were trim this, cut this,
for sure.
Like just that sort of very judicious.
The cast I will say, one of the other pieces of advice I'd give for filmmakers is cast good actors, but cast smart actors. As you all can tell from Candice's very eloquent responses in this interview, she's very, very smart. And don't you think the whole cast, it's a particularly smart group of actors?
Oh my God, brilliant. I'm just like, I love all of them so much. Everyone I learned from. And just like the first day on set, I was like, oh, that's exactly who I envisioned that character to be, and to see them come to life. And the work that everyone's done is...
And what's great about casting smart actors is they understand that story is the priority. It's not ever really about your performance. It is in the sense that your performance is serving this greater thing. And that's true of directing and writing too. My job as a director isn't to be like, look what a good director he is. Or like as a writer, it's not even really like, look how great the writing is. It's like, look how great and effectively all these puzzle pieces serve this invisible thing that's outside of the movie. What's nice about that mentality too is it eliminates everyone's ego, even the DP, right? Like it's never about it's never about one thing. So if you have to cut something or remove something, we all know that if it makes the movie better, it lifts every boat. So like even if we cut a great moment that Candice gave us, if it serves the movie, it makes every other moment she has in the movie seem better because we cut it. So it's a very weird esoteric thing, but important.
Oh, it's so important. I always feel like anytime if anyone's appreciating and gets an award, I'm like, you should be so grateful for all those puzzle pieces coming together, because if not for that, then the performances that we end up seeing are not necessarily what was the original or where it was to begin with.
Yeah.
And to close the loop, I'll say this, because as an editor, I've been there firsthand, where you can really shape a performance, right? And stuff like that. But I will say I'm lucky enough to know a lot of the people on Always Lola. Candice, you and I have worked in multiple capacities. I vouch for you. Andrew Guy is in both your movie, my movie, two completely different stellar performances. I've worked with Roxy on a short film very early on. I think she's amazing. Sheldon and Colin, I've not had a chance to work with, but we've become closer. And then Corinne, I really want to shout her praises because we didn't finish everything in Colombia as we needed to. And I needed a stand-in in LA. And I was like, this is going to be the most insulting thing to ask an actor, is to just literally like, let me film the back of your head. But Corinne looked the part and did it with no ego attached. She's like, whatever you need, So I really, that's my working experience with Corinne, and she delivered, and no one knows that it's Corinne, and, which is, it's the best compliment, but also like, again, I knew it was like the worst. Like, it's like any other person would be like, you want me to do what? But so anyway, just
Corinne is, I do view her as just like such an actor's actor. Like she is just so good. And I do think like she really just loves the craft. The whole cast does. It's funny. I could say that about anyone, but it doesn't surprise me that Corinne was just like, because I feel like she just loves the chance to get on set and work at a high level in whatever capacity it will end up.
She made a mistake. We are not at a high level. I'm speaking for myself, not for you. Just joking. But thank you guys for doing this. What's the website? AlwaysLolaFilm.com. Is that what it is?
Yeah, it's alwayslolafilm.com. And if you do /watch at home, you'll have all the options for how to watch it. And yeah, you should go rent it. I'm proud of it. And again, it's a fun, feel-good 85-minute movie. And even if you're just watching, these performances are so good. It's a really fun chance to watch people just like working at their highest level and hang out with some fun characters. So check it out.
Yeah, shout outs to everybody in the cast too.
Yeah.
And I mean this in the best spirit. Like, I really think like, I always love those movies when you see like a talented group at their earliest, and then because they're going to do great things, right? And so I love discovering like older movies with like, I've never actually seen a Fast Times at Richmond High, and like seeing that and seeing like, oh, there's Sean Penn, there's like all these people. So I really think this will have that ability to stand the test of time, and I think everyone involved, cast, crew, has a big career ahead of themselves. So I think this is one of many.
Yeah. Thanks, Phil. Me too.